My name is Adrien Schless-Meier, and I'm a sociology major. My thesis advisor was Kirsten Whittington. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and my thesis title was Open and Accessible to All, Organizational Colorblindness in the Portland Farmers Market. So the Portland Farmers Market is a 501c6 nonprofit. Based in Portland, it operates 7 farmers markets in the Portland metro area. So I had been working for a vendor at the PSU market for about a year and a half before I started writing my thesis. He had me working at different farmers markets throughout Portland, and I was at work. It was a Sunday afternoon. There were a bunch of people there. A black man in about his mid-30s came up to me. He was wearing a suit, and he asked me if any black people had been invited to the market. That interaction really stuck with me, and I have been thinking about sort of the ways in which people make excuses for the underrepresentation of people of color in Portland farmers markets. And that sort of started me off on this big inquiry into how market organizations themselves might actually prevent people of color from participating. And so that was what my thesis looked at, was the way in which people in the Portland Farmers Market organization think about racial inequity and white privilege. There are 2 guiding logics in the Portland Farmers Market. One is to make sure that farmers get economic returns, and the other is to provide fresh local produce to all Portland residents. Often those 2 goals can be at odds when you're trying to serve people with low income or people of color. What I found was that the way to resolve the tension between those 2 goals, when it arose, particularly in terms of race and class, was to adopt a colorblind ideology and sort of acknowledging any complicity that the market itself might have in maintaining those boundaries. There was an acknowledgement that boundaries were there, but in terms of the way that the market itself upheld those boundaries, things were a little bit less clear. I noticed that people were more willing to talk about class-based inequity than they were racial inequity. I argued that that was because addressing class-based concerns served that primary goal of getting economic returns to farmers more explicitly and directly than did promoting racial equity in the markets. So where that tension was more easily resolved, I saw the market making more significant strides in trying to address class inequity. In order to address racial inequity, you have to talk about race directly as its own separate issue, disentangled from class-based issues. Often when I would talk to people about inequity, they would steer the conversation toward socioeconomic status and ignore race entirely. One of the primary theories in sociology is that there's something called compound disadvantage. So race and class overlap and they affect each other, but they're not the same thing. I was making the case that there are strategies that the market could use to address racial inequity specifically as it relates to class-based inequity, but also on its own. One of the things that really speaks to me about sociology is that it forces us to take a really critical look at all of the structures that we participate in, how they overlap, and how complex it is to be a citizen. And the way that I plan on using my sociological background is to be able to look at all of the macro structures that are affecting how people gain access to healthy food in the US. They're sort of overlapping environmental and social and political factors that shape the food landscape. Looking at those different intersections, I think, is really going to help me pursue a career in public health based off of nutrition and farm-to-school education.